The archivist pried the iron lid and found a fresh, charred sigil pressed into damp parchment. Suspicion rose in his throat before he could name it. The mark smelled of smoke and iron. He touched the smear of dried blood with a gloved fingertip and felt the immediate weight of a decision. Keep the find secret or lay it before the council. He chose investigation. The chest slammed shut in the cellar when the latch caught. A muffled drip counted the seconds while he worked. He had no proof yet that this object would change more than a library record, but the presence of a bone pendant tucked in the pages made the danger concrete. That pendant meant a living practitioner. He moved fast. The archivist carried the satchel to a wooden table, set a tallow lamp, and opened a leather-bound notebook. He wrote marginalia in small, exact letters. Chest found beneath municipal ledgers, seal broken, sigil charred bone pendant present. He recorded distances and names he knew. The Hollow, a ruined farmhouse on the southern road. A landowner widow who sold off the property. A parish with an ash heap by the lane. He read the sigil twice and traced its lines with a fingertip. His hands did not tremble, but his jaw tightened in a way Marta would later notice as he measured pauses before he revealed facts. That tightening was his first visible action of suspicion turning toward purpose. He left the cellar after midnight. The road smelled of wet straw and coal smoke. He had been a municipal archivist for 20 years. His life ran on catalogue numbers and ledger folds. Tonight his catalogue would become evidence. He chose a coat that sat heavy with pockets. Wax, sealed satchel, leather-bound notebook, spare lamp fuel. He thought of the council's habit of burying inconvenient rituals in theological reports or destroying them outright. He thought, in particular, of Cardinal Verrex and his ritual-burn scar along the temple. The idea that a practice could work outside their control tightened his shoulders. The architect of records did not expect a confrontation when he reached the Hollow. Marta of the Hollow stood halfway through a doorway, her braid caught on a nail, a string of braided cords and charms clinking faintly when she moved. Her hands were stained with ash. She looked up at him without surprise. "You came," she said, eyes steady. Marta spoke low. Her whisper drew him in without theatrics. I found this in the municipal archive." He placed the satchel on a crate and opened it. The pendant caught the lamp light and threw a thin streak of crimson across the floor. Marta tilted her head. "You should not have opened that chest," she said. Her voice did not plead, it measured risk. The archivist replied, "You leave traces, Marta." He kept his sentences short. He kept his questions precise. She set a small clay bowl on the table and touched a torn edge of parchment. "This is not mine to keep secret," she said. "It is what I was given to do." The line between motive and doctrine split there in the farmhouse. Marta's motive was not doctrine. Her hands moved as she spoke. She hummed an old cadence under her breath and counted movements on her fingers with rhythmic precision. The archivist watched those movements as if they were a map. He for demonstration. She agreed with a single, small nod. He stayed silent while she arranged objects. Bone pendant, a length of braided cord, a small ritual knife with a worn handle. She traced a sigil on the dirt floor with charcoal, then burned it in the center until a thin ring of ash remained. At each step she counted under her breath. He counted with her silently once, twice, then lost the number as his focus narrowed. Marta closed her eyes and aligned a brass disc over the charcoal. The metal warmed under her palm. She hummed. A low sound rose from the farmhouse rafters as if wood remembered old nails. The ritual produced a result the archivist could not dismiss. A locked chest across the room opened. He had no knowledge of a mechanism, no wire, no trick of simple tools. The chest had been secured with a peg and a crude lock. The peg slid and the lid lifted by a fraction. A damp, unmistakable scent surged from inside the chest. The same smell of iron and smoke that had clung to the municipal pages. The archivist stepped forward and touched the inner lid. He found it warm. He had trained himself to note physical evidence. He recorded the warmth, the ash ring, and the exact cadence of Marta's counting. His suspicion shifted to alarm the instant his notebook recorded the chest's opening. "Show me how it works," he said. His voice was controlled. "Show me the sequence." Marta met his eyes. She did not smile. "I will not teach you everything," she said, "but I will show you that it can be done again." She slowed the cadence. She altered the pressure of her thumb along the disc. The chest closed. Then she repeated the steps, precise and machine-like. The chest opened again. The repeated effect erased any comfortable explanation of coincidence. The archivist's curiosity hardened into urgent alarm. He stopped counting on his fingers and instead set his pen to paper and copied the sequence in shorthand. He left before dawn. The farmhouse door closed behind him with a single, decisive click. He carried a folded page with Marta's shorthand. He carried photographs he had taken of the burnt sigil, though his hands shook when he wound the camera film in the dark. He walked through parish lanes with the pendant in a sealed envelope against his chest. He thought of the council's response if they learned that a ritual produced results that eluded centralized oversight. The thought shifted him again. From alarm to strategy, he planned a hearing. Word reached Cardinal Virax within 2 days. The cardinal sat in his antechamber and listened to aides who spoke fast and low. Papers arrived with precise problems circled. The council feared disorder. Virax rubbed the cruciform brooch and coughed to interrupt a younger man who suggested leniency. Order must be maintained. His hands were steady when he signed a summons. The archivist read the sealed decree in the council hall and felt the room tilt toward confrontation. He had prepared copies of the notes. He carried the bone pendant wrapped in a linen scrap. He kept his spectacles low and measured his pauses. Suspicion had pushed him into action. Now the stakes required him to move with evidence. At the public hearing, the archivist laid the parchment on the table and presented the pendant. The chamber smelled of beeswax and old wood. A senior counselor named Alden, who had faded importance but sharp features, leaned forward. The archivist claims a repeatable effect. Alden produced the demonstration. Marta. Show us in plain sight. Marta entered the chamber without a procession. She wore patched linen with ritual embroidery and braided cords. Her hands were wrapped in worn leather. "I will not perform violence, Marta, but I will prove the sequence," the council murmured. Cardinal Virax interrupted. "You will not turn this house into a stage," he said. His voice carried the weight of authority. The archivist answered, "If it works in private, it works in public. The people deserve to know whether their parish is affected." The argument split the room into 2 audible factions. A junior counselor named Catling called for mercy for practitioners. Another called for immediate destruction of materials. Voices rose. The air tasted of salt and candle wax. Marta set a small cloth on the floor in the chamber and refused a raised platform. She knelt and drew the sigil, charcoal biting the air. Her counting was short, precise. The archivist leaned forward until his spectacles rested low and his note-taking became a physical action. Pen scratching, lamp tilting. The first demonstration caused a metal box at the chamber's far end to click open and spill a folded paper bearing a priest's name. A cry from the gallery followed. Someone shouted, "Forge! Trickery!" The archivist held up a printed copy of the municipal record that recorded the same priest's name and the same folded paper months earlier. He read the entry aloud in staccato phrases. January 9th. Charred seal noted. Parish complaint filed. Each line of his reading stripped away excuses. Cardinal Virax's jaw tightened. He stepped forward and ran a hand along his brooch. "Who provided the pendant? Who is responsible for the spread of such rites?" he demanded. He did not wait for an answer. The question forced a turn. A counselor named Osric, whom the archivist knew by name from ledgers, was found to have marginal notations in an older manuscript that matched the sigil. The revelation reversed an accusation. Voices rose in the chamber and then fell into a stunned silence. The archivist felt the temperature of the room change. His suspicion had earlier moved him to curiosity and then alarm. It now moved him to a new certainty. Someone in authority had used the same mark. A rapid argument followed. Virax spoke in controlled short sentences. "Destroy the manuals. Arrest those who teach outside our remit. Seal the hollow." Alden pushed back. "Cardinal, you cannot ignore that a counselor has the mark. You ask us to condemn our own." The back and forth accelerated until it became a clash. 3 days to a decree. Verux barked. "Catelyn, we must hear witnesses." Marta clenched her jaw and kept silent while men argued. Her hands tightened on the small ritual knife, visible now and then when she folded her fingers. The clash turned into action in the council chamber at night. Council guards arrived with lanterns. Verux enacted a sealed decree with a slow, deliberate hand. He signed and rolled the parchment and slammed his palm down on the table. "Sealed by my hand," he said. The archivist tried to record the sealing, but a guard stepped toward him. Marta stood when the men moved to seize her notebooks. She did not shout. She moved with a sudden, physical urgency. She lunged to pull a satchel toward her, and the guard reached for her wrist. A tussle began. The archivist set his lamp down and shoved a folded copy of the pages into his coat. He felt the raw friction of cloth and metal as men moved. Shouts broke the chamber's measured order. Marta struck the guard's hand with her wrist wrap, and the knife flashed out. Someone cried a name, Alden, and then more arms grabbed at Marta. The archivist stepped between a guard and the woman to push them apart. He felt the scrape of leather on his knuckles. The room smelled sharply of burned paper and sweat. Cardinal Verux banged his gavel. "Seize the materials," he ordered. Men rushed forward, and the sound of papers tearing filled the chamber. The archivist saw the bone pendant fall free and roll toward the lip of the dais. He lunged and caught it before a boot could crush it. He looked at Marta. She had been hauled to her feet and held by 2 guards. Her face was set. Her voice, when she spoke, was a tight whisper that still carried across the tiled floor. "You do not understand what you destroy," she said. "You will not stop what you cannot name." Verux stepped close. "Marta of the Hollow, you have endangered the peace. You will answer for your deeds or be punished." The guards tightened their hold. Marta's mouth formed a small sound. No plea, no cry, only a single, controlled exhale. The archivist felt his resolve break into action. He loosened his coat and slipped the pendant into a wax-sealed satchel he had prepared for this possibility. He did not announce the act. The decree moved quickly after that. Materials were burned in a courtyard while the council watched. Men handed manuscripts into flames. The archivist watched each page curl and ignite. He kept a steady hand when he copied a line of text and pressed the wet copy to dry in his lamp's light. He could not stop the bonfire, but he could remove one pendant and a smuggled page. He tied the satchel and hid it under a loose floorboard in his lodgings. Marta was taken for interrogation and then held until the council could decide exile or imprisonment. The archivist argued in private with Alden and Catelyn. He pushed for exile rather than execution. He made precise, small points about precedent and naming. They agreed to exile with conditions. The archivist left knowing he had bought Marta a fragile reprieve. After the hearing, he returned to his lodgings with sleep layered among his motions. He copied the forbidden pages by lamplight. He wrote in small, exact script so that a novice could later follow the sequence if they knew where to find it. He slipped a stolen bone pendant into the wax-sealed satchel and wrapped the pages in an oilcloth. He arranged a false ledger entry to hide the removal. He planned Marta's exit: a wagon, a night path, a woman who would claim to be a cotton seller and take a parcel south. He made instructions in a code of place names and drop points. Each step was concrete. He did not write manifestos. He wrote motions and safe words and rotes. The chapter's small twist came 3 weeks after the decree. The archivist walked the lane by the old parish at dawn to check the ash heap where the council had burned a set of materials. He knelt and scraped away cold ash with his gloved hand to test for remnants. Beneath the ash he found a small indentation where a bone pendant had been buried whole. He blinked and picked at the soil. A single tender sprout pushed through the edge of the pendant's burial mark. He touched the sprout's tip with the pad of a finger. It bent and returned to vertical resilience. He closed his hand over the sprout and felt the texture of living green between rough skin and ash. The sprout made the problem impossible to declare solved. He wrapped the sprout gently in a strip of cloth and placed it inside the wax-sealed satchel with the copied pages. The presence of living growth underlined the point Marta had made in the chamber. You cannot fully destroy a thing that draws life out of ash. The archivist did not write a proclamation. He tied his satchel shut. He spoke one short line into his notebook, as if to a witness, "Preserve the seed," he wrote. He could not keep everything. He could keep this one thing. He arranged for Marta's wagon to leave on a rainy night 3 days later. The last scene of the night in the chapter closes on the archivist arranging Marta's exit in a narrow alley behind the market. He handed the lantern to a woman who would shepherd Marta away. He did not say goodbye. He watched as Marta, wearing a patched linen cloak and the braid braided with cords and small bones, stepped into the wagon and settled among burlap sacks. Marta looked back once, and the archivist saw the faint ritual tattoos along her jawline and the crescent scar on her palm. She nodded, an action that contained acceptance and a threat. Acceptance of exile, threat that the practice might survive without the council's approval. Marta's wagon moved away through rain. The archivist closed his hand over the satchel and felt the weight of the bone pendant and the small sprout inside. He carried the paper copies of the ritual sequence in his coat. He had turned defeat into a furtive plan to keep the knowledge alive. He had moved through suspicion to curiosity, into alarm, and then into a quiet resolve to preserve what the council sought to erase. The chapter ends on a clear, concrete beat. The archivist places the sealed satchel beneath a loose floorboard in his study, slides the board closed, and folds the ledger on top to hide the seam. He sits back, palms flat on the table, and listens for any footstep that might ring through the hall. A single knock falls on his door 3 nights later, precise and measured. He does not answer in words in this chapter. He sets the lamp higher and reaches for his spectacles. The narrative of this chapter resolves the immediate conflict. The ritual was demonstrated, the council bandit arrests and exile followed, and the archivist smuggled proof. The final paragraph ties to a situation, not a sentiment. The sealed satchel waits under a floorboard, and a knock at the door introduces a new, concrete event that leads into what follows. No general moral closes the episode. Only the fact of the satchel, the sprout, and the knock remain to push the story onward. Marta pressed the final mark, and the child's chest rose with a steady breath. Grief drove her hands. The word grief sits raw in every motion she has kept private for 3 winters. She did not look up when the mother's sob passed into a small, controlled gulp. The child, slick with sweat and mud from fever, stopped thrashing and turned the face toward the lamp, eyes opening to gape at the braided cords and bone beads that hung from Marta's wrist. The cottage smelled of crushed herbs and iron. Marta wiped her palm on the hem of her patched linen, fingers still holding the knife's small weight. She kept breathing at the rhythm. She decounted through the rite. In, 3, out, 3. That counting held the ritual together and kept her from remembering other hands that could no longer do anything for her brother. She folded the knife and set it beside the bone pendant. A knock sounded at the door, 3 quick raps. Marta froze with her hand on the latch. A voice answered from outside. "Open, Marta. It is me. Do not hide this from me." The voice was a traveling priest's. Thin, edged with the authority of a collar and the certainty of routes and names, Marta did not unlatch immediately. Her shoulders tightened. She paused, counting under her breath. The emotion at the chapter's root, grief, moves every choice she makes here. It has led her to risk the watch of the council and the scorn of neighbors. When she opened the door, a man in a dusty priest's coat stood under the eaves, hands clenched around a scrap of damp cloth. He held it as if it might still burn. "The child," he said. "I saw you. I saw it finish." He breathed. His eyes did not look like a witness' eyes. They were sharper, cataloguing. Marta took the cloth and peeled back the soaked edge. There, dark against off, white linen, the sigil left a smear of blood and smoke. Marta recognized the shape she had traced in the air and pressed into skin. It matched a lane of marks she had never shown to anyone other than the wooden effigy she kept in the hollow behind her cottage. The priest did not step inside. "They will hear of this," he said. "They will say you conjure things without permission." Marta answered with a statement, an emotion rather than a plea. She placed the cloth in the pocket of her satchel and tucked the bone pendant under it. "Bring the man who carried him," she said. Bring him to the archive. Let the thing be set down where men read what must be read. Her voice was low and precise. She did not ask for mercy. At the archive the night smelled of cold stone and oil. The archivist had not expected a witness at this hour. He had been bent over a set of bound pages earlier that evening, pages that still smelled faintly of the iron lid he had wrenched open in the previous chapter. He had touched a charred sigil and felt the quick weight of a decision. When the priest pushed a wet scrap across the table, the archivist's fingers tightened. He recognized the smear by touch before he looked. "Show me where you found this." The archivist. His voice carried the slow measurement he used when cataloging dangerous entries. The priest explained. A cottage on the hollow road, a child seized with a fit, a woman who moved like a person who had rehearsed grief long enough to keep it in a small, steady pocket. Marta's name came out of the priest's mouth last, and he said it with the careful unease of a man who knows names will bring consequence. A second emotion rose in the archivist at that moment, curiosity shaded by alarm. He tapped his finger against the notebook at his hip. He had choices: file the scrap as another piece of superstition, or trace it and expose a pattern. He remembered the iron lid and how the charred sigils smelled of smoke and iron. That earlier discovery sat in his mind like a lodged splinter. He did not yet speak the thought aloud. He carried the memory forward with the same measured breath he used in reading old decrees. The archivist arranged a lamp and laid the cloth flat. He set the sealed folio he had taken from the lid beside it, keeping the leather strap taut under his palm. He did what he always did when one concrete object touched another. He compared edges. He lifted the scrap and pressed it to the folio's margin. The sigils matched like two halves of an instrument. The room shifted into two possible actions: concealment or exposure. The archivist. Tell me how the woman performed it. The priest told a tight sequence. Humming under breath, counting movements on fingers, a cut along the wrist, a mark pressed into the skin with something hot, a bone pendant pressed against the sternum. Each detail landed as if someone were setting a tool on the table. The archivist wrote the words down in short, clean lines. He carried that evidence to a man who would make decisions. Cardinal Verrex. The study smelled of candle wax and old robes. Verrex's hand, fat from long meals and decisions, hovered over a pile of sealed decrees. He did not look surprised when the archivist entered. He merely allowed the candle to gutter slightly as he inclined his head. "You bring trouble at this hour, Cardinal Verrex." His voice rasped like a bell with a chip. "Do not make light, archivist. Speak plainly." The archivist laid the cloth and folio on the desk. He named Marta's cottage and described the effect on the child. He watched the cardinal's face in the dim light. The man's brow tightened. A hardened line formed above his nose. "This is a breach of order, Verrex." He fingers rubbed the cruciform brooch at his chest. "A woman who heals outside the council's sanction invites chaos. Do you understand what that does to us?" His manner was political, precise. His aim was not the child's life but the council's authority. The archivist felt a new shift. From curiosity and alarm to a diplomatic caution. "Cardinal, I only bring what I found. The folio is sealed. It matches the scrap. I do not ask you to condemn without hearing more." Verrex's hand slid to a sealed decree he kept folded on the table. He did not reach for it. He closed his eyes for a slow count and then opened them with a minor, practiced hardness. "Bring her, Verrex, bring her before the council under pretense of questioning. We will test this rite in private. If it heals, then we decide the matter as we must. If it harms, then we make an example." The archivist left with the cardinal's weight pushing on his back. He had not expected to be pulled into enforcement, but the folio in his satchel warmed against his ribs like a second heart. Dawn found Marta waiting in the antechamber. She did not sit. She stood with shoulders squared, hands folded over one another so the bones of her fingers clicked. When the archivist entered, she looked past him at the corridor where guards paced. She did not lower her gaze. Her voice when she spoke was small but direct. "You read what I do, Marta. You read, and you keep it like a book. Why would you hide what works?" The archivist answered with the only thing he could give that would not betray either of them. A report. Martyr, the council fears what it cannot control. She laughed once, a quick sound without joy. The council fears me because I do not seek its blessing. Martyr, I seek results for the living. My brother is not a ledger entry. Her hands moved in an offbeat counting. She counted the stitches she had used to hold a wound in secret, or the times she had set a bone in a field. The archivist listened and watched her throat tighten. Her resolve hardened into defiance, then softened into a different shift. Doubt. Will you tell them what you found? He faltered. He had the folio and the weight of the lid's memory with its charred sigil. He thought of the priest who had sought sanctuary for a child, and of the scribes who would be ordered to whiten texts. I will present the evidence honestly. She measured the confession with quick eyes. The corners of her mouth stayed flat. The council allowed a private demonstration. 2 delegates came to the chapel with robes folded tight, their faces set in lines carved by appointments. Martyr stood before a wounded man whose arm hung limp at his side. The room smelled of oil and old wood. She set the knife to the inside of her palm and let a droplet of blood bead and fall onto a small disc of flint. She hummed under her breath in a cadence she had learned as a child. She counted on her fingers with the same rhythm she used in the cottage. Hands reached for the man's arm and then drew back when the skin pulled together. The cut closed and the ragged line of torn muscle smoothed under skin. One delegate stepped forward and spoke. Martyr, explain what you do. Martyr did not answer with a lecture. She placed the bone pendant against the man's pulse and said, I traced the mark where the injury will let go. She pressed the pendant, and the man's breath changed. Air left and came in shallower until steadier. At that precise moment the air in the chapel altered in a way the delegates could not name. A tightness across the back of their throats and a thin, sharp sound like metal rasping against stone. A faint sigil seared itself on the man's palm, white against darker skin, then faded to the observers until only Martyr and the archivist could swear they had seen it. A delegate stepped back and rubbed his hand as if the sight had burned him. I did not expect that. The archivist allowed. He felt the second emotion shift in a new direction, clarity collapsing into fear. The delegates looked at one another. Cardinal Verux, who had not been present in the chapel, arrived by the time the room had emptied into whispers. His jaw set into a line that threw his eyes into shadow. Bring me the folio. Bring the witnesses. We will convene tonight. His cough clipped the sentence. The council session fractured quickly. Verux moved with a politics that had learned to use fear as leverage. He accused Martyr of sorcery in the language the council used for threats to order. This practice solves problems outside our sanction and thus makes men seek private remedies rather than the council's decrees, he said. He hammered the table with his hand, and a sealed decree rattled on the wood. The archivist felt the air in the hall collect like rain behind a door, a pressure of coordinated intent. Delegates argued. 1. We should examine the method and codify it if true. Another, we cannot allow a single practitioner to claim authority over life and death. We will be blamed if we approve. The archivist watched their hands and heard their words. In the argument there were rapid exchanges, 3 to 5 back, and fourths, each line short and edged with the names of those present. Cardinal Verux, said a delegate. Do you propose what? A purge. Verux answered with a slow, deliberate hand wave. We propose a decree that bans this rite and orders all records removed. The council must not be outstripped. The archivist felt his stomach tighten. He slid from one emotion into another, duty into a private rebellion. He knew the story the council would write. He also knew the folio's margin and the charred sigil it held. The archivist moved to the scribal chamber after the session, footsteps measured and quick. The scribes there worked with pale faces and ink-stained thumbs. He cornered one who kept late order and found pages whitened and columns written with decisive gouges. He pressed his hand flat on an altered page and asked, "Who ordered this?" The scribe looked away and tapped his quill against the table like a man trying to count down fear. "The cardinal's seal came last night," the scribe said. He demanded the purging. Our chronicles may not help an idea that undermines us. The archivist felt anger climb in his throat. He nothing for a beat. Then he asked a simple question. How much did you whitewash? The scribe's shoulders dropped, all mentions of the rite, all names tied to the sigil, pages removed, folios bound and locked. They took the originals to be burned. I kept one paragraph hidden by mistake. The archivist pressed his thumb to the hidden paragraph and read a single sentence aloud in a whisper. It named the bone pendant, an accounting cadence that matched the humming Marta used. That discovery forced a decision. He could follow orders and hand the folio over to be destroyed, or he could keep the single page like a seed in his satchel. He felt the pull of duty measured against the stubborn fact that the rite had healed a child when everything else had failed. He took the folio, wrapped it in oilcloth, and tucked it inside his satchel under his wax seal. It warmed at his side. Night drew the council into an emergency session. Marta was brought forward and stood before men who had the authority to end her. Her wrists were not bound. They did not need to be. She stood with the same tied hands she had used in the antechamber, and when she spoke, she did so to faces carved by convenience. I do not claim miracles, she said. I claim a sequence of motions that returns a body to measure. If you name it, you may make it lawful. If you bury it, you make hidden fires that burn more people than you admit. A delegate interrupted. Marta, you put us in danger. She answered, you already are in danger. You only name the cause now. Voices rose. Verax slammed a sealed decree onto the council table. The sound snapped across the hall. He unfolded the document and read the lines that would make the rite disappear from public record and punish those who practiced it. He cited threats to order and unnamed consequences. Argument became shouts. Marta's eyes flicked to the archivist. He met her gaze and felt the friction of a choice he could no longer hide. A quick exchange erupted between delegates arguing for mercy and delegates demanding punishment. We cannot allow unsanctioned remedies, Verax insisted. We must protect the people's faith in the council. We must not be cowardly, one delegate shot back. If it works, we must study it for the common good. The archivist watched the debate and heard the names of those who would sign the decree whispered like litany. The gavel fell and Verax's decree sealed the rite's public erasure. The archivist felt a physical clamp tighten in his chest, an urge to exhale and then stop. After the decree, the archivist did what he had done before. He slipped into the archive's back passage with the folio pressed tight against his ribs. He found Marta being led from the hall by 2 guards. She did not resist. Her hands were open, not in surrender but in keeping things small. He stepped from shadow and handed a small, folded note into her palm. She glanced down, recognized his handwriting, and tucked the note beneath her robes where it would be hard for a guard to see. Marta mouthed, "Do not burn it," and the archivist nodded minutely. He had already sealed one folio in oilcloth and placed it in his satchel. He had also left a single paragraph smuggled into the margins of a different manuscript. These were not acts of grand rebellion. They were measured thefts like the ones the archivist had learned to perform when the council's seal felt heavier than the truth. Outside the archive, the courtyard was dawn cold. The archivist walked the path by the wall, feeling the power of the folded folio at his side. He had preserved one record. The consequence of that choice would ripple. Marta placed in custody, a sealed decree signed, scribes ordered to whiten pages. He had saved a seed of knowledge, and in doing so had declared himself its keeper. He did not say the word treason or hero. He only felt the straight tightness of decision. Marta sat on a stone bench while the guards argued softly about logs and rations. She traced a small line on her palm with a fingernail, feeling the faint crescent scar there, and then she drew the corner of the archivist's note free. He had written a single instruction and a single promise. Keep this safe until the council cannot claim you are alone. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes set into a patient, slow resolve. The chapter closes with a concrete action. The archivist slips the sealed folio into his satchel while Marta is led away under guard. He watches until the courtyard gate swings closed and one silhouette passes beyond it. He turns back toward the archive, and the scribal chamber where pages wait to be read. He has made his choice. The immediate situation is resolved. Marta is in custody. The decree is sealed. A folio remains hidden. And the consequences of that preservation will push the next chapter forward. Emotion shifts threaded the chapter. Grief moves Marta into ritual action. The archivist's curiosity becomes alarm. Alarm becomes cautious duty. Caution becomes a small rebellion. Clarity turns to fear in the chapel. Fear hardens into a secret resolve. Each change shows itself in hands, in counted breaths, in the placement of signature items, the bone pendant, the wax-sealed satchel, the cruciform brooch. As characters act in response to what they see and must decide. A mid-chapter shock altered the council's tone, a faint sigil appearing on the patient's palm during the closed demonstration. That reveal forced witnesses to move from skepticism to unease and gave Cardinal Verux the leverage he needed to push a ban. The archivist's discovery of whitewashed pages delivered another twist. The purge was coordinated and ordered from the top. This chapter resolves its immediate conflict. The council has banned the rite and purged records. Marta is in custody. The archivist has hidden the folio. The last image is concrete. The archivist's satchel closed with its wax seal, the leather warm against his palm. He walks toward the scribal chamber, the folio heavy at his side and the knowledge now moving from public danger into hidden custody. That single movement, a man stepping with a weight at his hip, closes the chapter with a distinct event and sets the next course of action. A cloaked man stepped over the scattered rushes and seized the bone pendant from Marta's hand. Suspicion tightened the archivist's jaw. He caught the sound of the pendant striking rock and the mother's quiet gulp behind him. Marta drew back, one hand flat on the fevered child's chest, the other curled toward the broken sigil burned into damp parchment. Stop. The cloaked figure barked. A villager lunged. A lantern tipped and a smear of lamp oil streaked across the floorboards. Within 3 breaths the hollow filled with shouts, the child's steadying breath, and the metallic scrape of a token being snatched away. The central problem, the rite still worked and someone intended to stop it, sat between them like a struck bell. The archivist moved first. He had come to the hollow to record, to measure, to catalogue what other men erased. He stepped into the circle and set his notebook on the stone, glove, sleeve brushing ash. He watched Marta's fingers count the final motions again, saw the mother's hands not leave the child's shoulders, heard the child's lungs find rhythm. The archivist felt suspicion harden into an aim. Preserve evidence or hand it to the council and risk annihilation of the practice, and perhaps of the practitioners. He had held the iron, lidded box where he had found the charred sigil. He had touched dried blood and felt the decision press at his throat before. Now the same choice presented itself in living flesh. Guards thundered at the hollow mouth 2 minutes later. The cleric's chain rattled. Someone had lit a horn. The cloaked informant did not wait. He shoved through the throng with a sealed crest on his cuff and pushed Marta to the stone, wrenching the pendant free. By order of the council, he said, voice flat and measured, hands up. All of you. Marta's jaw set. She did not drop her chin to plead. She only tightened the weave of her braided cords and folded her hands back into the motion that had steadied a fevered boy an hour ago. The crowd pressed. The archivist tucked a page into his coat. He had copied marginal instructions once before with scribe Lauren in a shuttered scriptorium. The faint smear of blood and ink still faint on the margin of his palm. He stepped away from Marta so the guards would not see which way his sleeve moved. He listened to the mother shout, "You can take her, she saved my boy," and watched a guard throw a gloved hand over the child's chest, hands barely obeying the proof of life that still came in small, wet breaths. They dragged Marta toward the lanes. The archivist followed at the edge of the procession and kept a page pressed to his ribs until he felt its edges soften with sweat. Outside, lamplight splashed on the cobbles and a dog barked twice, quick, then fell silent. A line of pursuing agents threaded the alleys, their boots echoing a rhythm that the archivist learned to read as a closing fist. He slipped through a doorway under a crooked sign and heard a raised voice ask, "Who is that man?" He did not answer. He reached Scribe Lauren's shuttered scriptorium while rain had begun to spit across the shutters. Lauren opened the door a crack and held a candle so the archivist could push inside. The room smelled of wet leather and reprocessed parchment. The archivist drew the page out and laid it on Lauren's desk. "Copy this," he said now. Quickly, Lauren's knuckles whitened around a quill. "You want me to copy this in these hours? The watch is looking for anyone with such things." The archivist slid a small coin across the desk and set the page under a damp cloth. "If this dies, Marta dies twice," he replied. Lauren's hands trembled while he worked. He hesitated over a cramped marginal note and then wrote it down, misreading a flourish and correcting it. He grunted under his breath. "They burned pages last month. Verrick's men cleared a scribe from the market." The archivist nodded once. He could picture the cruciform brooch. He could imagine Cardinal Verrick's thumb pressing a sealed decree into vellum. He kept his voice even. "We will make an accurate copy. I will carry it where they cannot see." He fed the candle a sliver of wax, and the flame steadied. That night, the archivist sat alone at a narrow desk with the copied marginalia spread under cold light. He read the cramped notes aloud to himself in clipped phrases, mouth-forming consonants to test the instruction. The marginal writing named the mechanism of the rite, a contraction of breath time to a counted gesture, a sacrament of binding between practitioner and subject that rerotted a fever into steady pulse at the cost of a small portion of the performer's life. The margin's hand had written, "1 breath for 1 winter. Mark the jawline to receive the price." The archivist's throat closed. He felt the second emotion shift, clarity replacing suspicion, then sinking into a hard, atching guilt once he realized what preservation would demand. He wrote the line again and then crossed it out. The archivist ran his thumb over the blot and heard the mother surlier sob like a struck bell. He set the copied page into a folded satchel and rehearsed a decision. Publish the rite and give people a chance to use it, or hand it to the council and watch the council bury it into its own doctrine. He thought of the child's steady breath and of the small crescent scar on Marta's palm, and the decision narrowed to a single, brittle axis. Guards burst into the council antechamber with the hollow air still on their shoulders. Marta walked in with chains clinking at her wrists and her braid loose at the nape of her neck. Cardinal Verrick sat behind the dais with rosary beads coiled around his fist. He nodded once, a deliberate motion, as if to remind himself how to begin. The archivist carried the revived child, wrapped in a rag, into the hall a short while later. The mother placed the child at the foot of the dais and lurched forward to point at Marta. "Cardinal Verrick's," the mother said, voice thin but steady. "She did this. My boy lives by her hands." Verrick watched the child's chest rise and fall. He did not look at Marta at once. He watched the child's throat as if it were some test object. "We will hear the truth," he said with slow, cold cadence. "Marta of the Hollow, how did you accomplish this?" Marta kept her eyes down and folded her hands. "I performed what is written, and I took what was written to receive it," she said. "I will not teach it here." Her voice was a small sound that carried. The council pressed in with questions sharpened into ritual accusation. Was this heresy? Councillor Ames, did she bargain with demons? Councillor Dale repeated the chamber's litany of fear. The archivist watched Verrick lean forward and make a gesture with his brooch. He watched Verrick's mouth set into the narrow line the archivist had seen before in the council chambers, when a man wanted to end debate and close the room. The atlas of power in the council leaned, in this instant, toward eradication. The archivist stepped forward then. He placed the folded satchel on the dais and opened it with a hand that did not tremble. He showed them the child's thin breath, the smear of dried blood at the corner of the copied page, the half-visible sigil. "This is evidence," he said. "This rite works where other measures failed." Verrick's eyes narrowed. "This is dangerous talk, archivist. Who authorized you to bring such a thing into council sight?" The archivist did not flinch. "No one authorized me. I brought proof." He pushed the copied marginalia onto the table and let it spread. Cardinal Verrick's voice lowered and gained a gravelly edge. "You understand what this forces us to decide, archivist. A practice that restores life at a price will unsettle our order. It will draw the desperate to unknown hands. It will be wielded without counsel. You either hand this to us, or you let it become lawless. The council cannot allow lawless cures. The archivist felt another emotion shift. Resolve. He had moved past suspicion and guilt. Then an intrusive doubt curdled into dread as he watched Verrick's robes settle like a closing cover over the table. Marta looked up at that, a single quick intake of breath, and the archivist read the tightening at her jaw. "Marta, for one measure of fairness, let me show you fully," she said, "not to teach. To show. Let them see the price for what it is." Verrick's fingers rapped the wood. "You would show us your debt in public," he said. "You would confess to the council the debts you owe." Marta's green eyes held the cardinal's. "I will not speak the words of instruction," she answered. "I will perform the controlled act." "Judge what you must," the council murmured. The archivist watched Verrick's brief hesitation. He flicked his rosary between two fingers and then rose. They cleared the hall. Candles were set in a circle on the chamber floor, and Marta took position in the center. The mother knelt a few paces away, hands flat on the child's chest. The archivist stood at the edge of the ring with his satchel open. He looked at the marginal notes one last time and felt the H like a stone against his sternum. Marta began the cadence she hummed under her breath. An old line of counting, fingers tracing the jaw, a soft pressure behind the ear. The room counted with her, silent in the gravity of watching a life be risked and preserved. The rite took hold in a way the marginalia had promised. The child's breath drew shallow, deepened, and then settled into steady rhythm. Marta's face paled. She kept the counting steady, her voice dropping to a near whisper. A bead of sweat tracked from her temple into the braided cords. The cost wrote itself into the air. Marta's skin went slack around the jawline where the inked mark lay, and for each steady breath the archivist imagined a winter counted down. When the act concluded, Marta sagged on her knees. She did not cry out. She clenched the small ritual knife in one hand and let it rest against her palm, not cutting, not to stain, but as if to feel the metal. She looked up at Verrick's. "I have paid what was called for," she said in a voice that had the steel of someone who had rehearsed surrender. "Do what you must." Verrick's face folded into the slow lines of triumph that men who govern sometimes wear before they deliver punishment. He reached for a sealed decree and smacked it onto the table so the sound stung. "By this council, the rite is to be banned and all materials expunged. Any practitioner will be punished as a heretic. The archive will be purged." He tapped the document with a large ring. The archivist watched as a dozen hands reached for pages. The archivist's fingers closed on the satchel strap. He heard the mother's voice. "Please let her go." "She saved my son." Verrick's reply was not in words so much as in motion. The decree sat sealed and the guards stepped forward to collect the marginalia and the pendant. The archivist acted in an instant. He put a palm on the copied page and pushed it down into his coat, then slid the satchel under his robe. Cardinal Verrick's hand moved like a vulture's shadow toward the satchel. The archivist felt the brush and pulled back, a practiced evasive turn. A council guard, younger than the others and with a scar at his temple, reached to catch the archivist's sleeve. There followed a sudden flurry of exchange. Voices rose, the archivist's name sounded, Marta's quiet refusal echoed, and Verrick's gavel, like knock, demanded order. "You will release that satchel." Verrick's voice thin and insistent. "Archivist, hand it over." The archivist hesitated a beat. He could feel the second twist in him, duty to preserve versus duty to protect. He remembered Scribe Lauren's hands that had trembled over his quill, and the hollow mother's bruise of gratitude. He thought of the child's steady breath. He resolved in a single, burning decision. The page could not be allowed to be filed under council authority. He drew a small scrap of burning tinder and dropped it against the margin of his copy. Paper caught in a bright, sudden kiss of flame. The archivist did not watch the page burn. He watched Marta's face for the flash of fury that would follow. She too understood what he had done. The page curled and blackened, the ink ran into ash. The council roared. Verrick slammed his fist down so hard the days thudded. "Seize him," he bellowed. Guards leapt. The archivist ran with the cloak of confusion. He wedged past a counselor and heard two guards collide behind him. Marta was dragged to her feet and forced between two armored men. The mother cried out and tried to reach the child, hands snagging at sleeves. The archivist felt the scrape of a gauntleted finger at his collar, but it did not hold. He darted through a side corridor and knocked over a lamp in his haste. Flames spattered wax across the flagstones. He took a narrow stair that led to a service entrance and spilled into cold night air. At dawn the council issued an official ban. A herald read the sealed decree on the steps while townspeople clustered at the square. Cardinal Virac stood at the dais and watched the crowd with an expression that had no softness in it. Marta, hooded and bound, was led out in chains. The archivist watched from a shadowed doorway as they passed. His satchel felt unbearably light where a single folded scrap lay, an ember of what had been. He followed them not to be captured, but to see what narrative the council would craft. The herald's words framed the rite as heresy, the work of a mad faction that manipulated spiritual law. They used phrases the archivist had seen before in sanctioned condemnations: danger to the orderly faith, seduction by illicit arts, threats to the moral fabric. The words flew like measurements meant to close the wound the council feared. People listened. Some stepped forward to shout approval. The mother shrank back and then, slowly, walked toward the path where Marta moved. The archivist felt his chest tighten with a new emotion. A bitter, private shame that his act of destruction had contributed to that narrative even as it kept the precise means from being used carelessly. He did not return to the council steps. He went instead to the wood where he had buried fragments before and dug with gloved fingers until the soil lay loose in his hands. He had with him the small bone pendant Marta had worn. He had torn a corner from the burned page and wrapped it in oilcloth. He worked with steady hands as dawn scraped the horizon clear. He pressed the pendant and the scrap deep into ash and tamped the earth down. The last action of the chapter was precise. He smoothed the soil with the heel of his hand and covered it until only a faint depression marked the place. He planted nothing, but when he pushed soil back, the back of his palm felt the twinge that comes when a seed meets cold ground. He paused and listened for the town bell. It tolled the hour. The archivist traced the outline of the scar on his cheek and felt the faint sting from where ink had smudged into his fingers the night before. He had saved no manual. He had kept no instruction. He had burned a chance to teach people how to take the cost. He had allowed the council to own the story that this act was heresy. He had preserved the child and lost a truth. The archivist folded his hands against the cold and left the earth to settle. Later, when he untied his satchel in a quiet room and checked the few things he had saved, Lauren's copied flourishes, a pencil sketch of Marta's hand, a line that might still be deciphered under suit, he found one small, unexpected thing. A green sprout, shrunk and brittle, caught to a ribbon inside the satchel where the ash had rubbed. He did not know if the sprout had been in the pocketed soil or had stuck to the bone pendant. He set it on the table and watched it with the same clinical curiosity he had used in the hollow. The archivist could not claim hope as a proper feeling. He catalogued the sprout as data and called it an anomaly. He wrote a single line into his notebook that night. The ritual produces a result, but at a predicable and personal cost. Public enforcement eradicates the method but not the will to use it. He underlined the word cost and closed the book. The archivist kept one small fragment of the burned page hidden between the leather covers. He had chosen destruction in council and preservation in secrecy. By noon the council's decree had spread and the record clerks had filed their copies with the appropriate seals. Cardinal Virac signed additional writs that dispatched teams to retrieve implements and to arrest known practitioners. Marta's fate was decided in the hours that followed. Exile beyond the marshes or a stoop in a fortress cell. The archivist learned in a ragged whisper from scribe Lauren that a younger guard had refused to hand over the mother's testimony and had been reassigned to a distant outpost. He noted these details without flourish and folded them into his ledger. The final twist revealed itself not in proclamation but in a single witness who approached the archivist in the market 2 weeks later. The witness was the young guard with the scarred temple. He whispered that in a roadside hovel an apprentice healer had been found carrying a crude copy of the rite. Written in a hurried hand that matched not the council's script, but an ordinary woman's, Marta's hand. They read the decree and came anyway, the young guard said. People still come when they have no other choice. The archivist felt a shift again. Resignation to resolve, then a prickling acknowledgement that erasure cannot blot out need. He walked to the edge of the wood and dug again. This time he placed a small bone pendant in a hollow and covered it with loose soil. He did not plant seeds. He left one page, torn and smeared, folded under a stone where rain would wash at it and time would erode the edges. He did not want to teach anyone in a plainly legible hand. He wanted only to bury a seed that required effort to find and to coax. When he left, a single green shoot pushed its thin head through the ash near where he had buried the first fragment. It was small and fragile. He pressed the soil down over it with his palm until the sprout bent but did not break. He did not speak of it aloud. He did not record it as a victory nor as a defeat. He took the map of the parish from his coat and tucked it into the satchel. He folded his notebook and slid it under his arm. The archivist walked back along the lane toward town and, at the council steps, he paused to watch a cart pass, where a man's widow stared straight ahead. He tightened his coat against the wind and remade his gait until it matched the town's predictable rhythm. He had burned a page, answered a council, and buried a pendant. The final scene that readers will hold is the archivist's hand pressing soil over the sprout until the green thread eased through dirt and reached for light. He did not call it hope. He called it an unresolved variable. The archivist had moved from suspicion to clarity to guilt, from resolve to resignation. 2 named secondary characters, Marta of the Hollow and Cardinal Verux, shaped crucial turning points. Scribe Lauren and the young guard altered the course by copying and refusing to surrender evidence. The children's steady breath in the hollow, Marta's count of gestures, the council's sealed decree, and the archivist's single act of burning the manuscript resolved the chapter's immediate conflict. The rite was publicly erased, Marta punished or exiled, and the archivist left burdened with a fragment and a moral wound. The last paragraph ends on a concrete image. His hand pressing soil over the sprout as it pierced the ash, an action that ties directly to the chapter's events and closes the sequence of choices made that night.